Okay, my friends, let us talk about kashrut, about keeping kosher. The first thing, did people have a chance to look at the source sheet at all? It's okay if you didn't. I'm just wondering. You did. Okay, terrific. Are there questions? Did they make sense? How did it feel? Grace, can you show us? Can you join us with your picture or not possible?
I can't right now, but I will next meeting.
Oh, okay, great. I would love for people to tell me, in your words, what does kosher mean for you? Really, it's not a test. I just would like to hear what people know before we begin. So one thing about kosher that you know, let's say. Yeah, go. Don't be shy. Nothing? Nobody knows anything about keeping kosher? I know you
Meat,
guys know.
meat has to be slaughtered in a specific way to be considered kosher.
Meat has to be slaughtered in a specific way to be kosher. Great. But let's backtrack. What kind of meat? It's not just slaughtering, by the way. There's three parts to it, but it's a good one. Shay, what do you want to say?
Well, the other two would be it has to chew its cud and have split hooves, and it has to be most of the time from the top part of the animal so that it doesn't get the sciatic nerve.
Wait, okay, so 1 second. So the first thing is let's differentiate between meat and chicken.
Right.
So
That's why it's
so what Shay was saying was that meat, beef, or I don't know how you separate between
goat.
goat, right? Anything
Mammals,
that
mammals.
mammals as opposed to birds, fowl as opposed to
Bird.
FOW. Right, good. Okay, great. And by the way, do we have any specific signs for birds? Anybody know?
I think it can't be a bird of prey, like
I
a
think that's
predatory
one of
bird.
them. And we also have to have some tradition. And there's something about having an extra, I don't know, knuckle or something. I don't exactly understand it. But turkey was a big deal because it wasn't clear that we had a tradition for turkey, believe it or not. It wasn't indigenous at the time. I don't know, but it was accepted as being kosher. So what Shay was saying, that if it's an animal, not a bird, a mammal, then it's also actually not a beast of prey. In other words, it's herbivore as opposed to carnivore, but that's not the actual signs. The signs would be chewing its cud and having split hooves. So what would be examples of yes and examples of no that people eat? Don't give me an animal. Like, we don't need to know about, I don't know how many people eat lions. So pick something that people eat that we do that is or isn't kosher. I'd be glad to hear just from that description.
I was very happy that bison can be kosher.
Bison, oh, I've actually had buffalo meat. It's actually delicious. Yes, great. So bison, buffalo, actually venison, is that how you pronounce it? Deer meat. I've never tasted it, but that's also kosher because they follow that. I mean, it might be more expensive. I don't know. And then cattle, cows, sheep, goat. What would be examples of something that's a mammal, of an animal that's a mammal, a herbivore, but is not kosher?
Pork.
Right? Pork, pigs, exactly. What else? And not that I know. I mean, I don't know myself.
Rhino? But you
So
don't
do
eat
people
that.
eat rhino meat? No. So it'd be something
No.
that would be, yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe people eat them. I don't know.
Rabbit.
Okay.
Rat.
Rabbit. Yes. That's
Rabbit.
a good one.
They chew their cud, but they don't have split hooves.
There you go. Chew their cuds on split hooves. Great. Latoya, if you can put on your camera, that would be awesome. And if not, that's okay too, but welcome to the group. Latoya, we want to make sure you hear us, so say something.
Yes, I'm getting everything sorted. Thank you so much, Rabbi. I'll put my camera
Okay.
on now.
Okay, no problem. So the only thing we've really said so far is that first, kosher, by the way, divides, I would call it into different buckets. Kosher it's a general term of things we're allowed to eat as observant Jews. That's kosher. Now, kosher, by the way, is always also used colloquially as something that's okay to do or valid, right? But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the halachic, the Jewish law term for things that are kosher. How do you lead a kosher life? How do you lead a life with kosher food? So one of them is that, again, if you're not vegetarian or vegan, then it would apply to you, because if you eat meat or chicken or types of birds, then this would apply to you. Then so let's start with beef, with meat. First of all, it has to be, it always is a herbivore, but then it has to have split hooves and chew its cud. Now, that doesn't really mean that usually that you have to check it out. You usually go to a kosher place and you see what's kosher and available. We don't generally just walk around, killing animals, but rather it has, once you know that the animal itself is kosher, and by the way, that's not enough either. It actually has to be kosher, and there are certain restrictions, conditions, if they have certain blemishes, whatever they are. I'm not familiar with them because I'm not what's called a shochet or shochetet, which is a person who ritually slaughters. Then the animal has to be slaughtered ritually. So it's very different from halal. Anybody here know what halal is? Oh, your video camera isn't working. Okay, hopefully it'll work next time. Maybe sometimes it helps to reset the computer, but I know that's a problem. We love to see people's faces. It's nice in this small group. So we said halal. So halal meat or halal is in Muslim tradition. I believe it's meat that is slaughtered with intentionality. So, hello. So, kosher meat would be helpful because it is killed with intentionality. It's slaughtered with intentionality, but the opposite is not true. We have to have the ritual slaughtering, so it would not be helpful for us to have halal meat. That doesn't go in both directions in this particular case. And I think probably has to be Jewish. The person has to learn the laws and do it correctly with the particular knife. And so that wouldn't work for us in other religions. Even if they theoretically slaughter it similar way, it still wouldn't be good enough for us. So the first thing is it has to be a kosher animal. Number 2, slaughtered ritually. And number 3 is, yes, Shay, you can unmute, really. People can unmute unless you have a lot of noise.
So I have a lot of noise a lot of times.
So it has to be ritually, right? There's a ritual salting, and that is because of the blood. We're not allowed to eat blood, and the salting, and there's a whole procedure that goes along with it. I learned it a couple of times, but generally most people don't do it because most people see meat that's already koshered. Koshered is the English way of taking the word kosher and turning it into a verb. Hello, Hadassah. Welcome. All right, so somebody, Grace, would you like to repeat back for us what you remember, what you took away from, oh wait, are you vegetarian, Grace? I'm just checking.
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay. So what would be the different pieces of having kosher meat?
The animal being kosher in the first place, as we went over, the ritual slaughter and the ritual salting, but then to actually eat it, there would be more about the utensils used to prepare it.
No,
and-
no.
Oh, we're not going there yet?
No,
Okay.
we will, 100%. No, Grace, you're great. I'll ask you in a moment. And as a matter of fact, you can't have raw meat. So you have to cook it. Not that most people eat raw meat, as far as I know. But you eat raw meat? Oh, my husband said, when did you eat raw meat? You eat kosher. Okay, I'll put that aside. Now, not raw, exactly. You mean rare. That's not the same thing. Okay, now let's go to fish. There are also certain fishes that are kosher and those that are not. So that's the other thing you need to know. And fish, how do we know that fish is kosher? Because there are 2 signs for fish that is kosher. Go ahead, Jeff, tell us.
Oh, sorry.
Gabby. No, go Gabby, go do
Go
it.
for it.
Go
I
for it,
was gonna
Gabby.
say fins and scales, but I wanted to ask about eating raw meat because I've seen like beef carpaccio at kosher restaurants before, and from what I understand, that's like I think raw, but I'm not totally sure.
I have no answer for that. I assume that they do something to it that makes it halakhically acceptable. That's all I can tell you. I don't know more than that. I don't even know that term that you told me. As far as I know, you are not allowed to have raw meat. That's as far
Okay.
as I know. Okay, so you can check it out and see how that's kosher. No, she said carpaccio. Okay. My husband, listen, if you want to take part, I'm taking out my headset. You can't ask me every 5 minutes, what did people say if you want me to Keep the headset in. Okay, fine. He's listening to half it and he's guessing. Okay. So fish has to have fins and scales. There's actually a halachic debate about swordfish, I believe, but some fishes that are kosher are salmon and tuna, tilapia. I'm not such a big fish eater, so I don't know that much about it, but fish you can have raw. So if you have sushi with raw fish, that's actually allowed as long as the fish itself is kosher. It does not have to be ritually slaughtered or salted. Okay? So this is just, I guess, Grace, I'm just for the moment going through the different foods that are inherently kosher or not kosher. And we will definitely get to the separation of meat and milk and dairy, which is the next step or one of the next steps. But let's just go through which foods are kosher inherently and which are not kosher. Okay. So we understand mostly about beef and chicken and fish. Are we getting that? Quail is kosher. Pheasant, I think, is kosher. Oh, by the way, there was a cool dinner that was made in Israel with all sorts of interesting animals. They do that once a year usually, and they served. What's the name of what's the name of it? The animal that has the beautiful plumage. Peacock. They served peacock.
Oh my gosh.
Peacock is kosher. Turns out it's kosher. We don't usually eat it, but they made a point of eating it. Okay, now there are some insects that are actually kosher, like types of locusts, and the only way we know that is by oral tradition. So this is a Yemenite tradition generally, and it turns out that if you don't have oral testimony that somebody knows it's kosher, and once that oral testimony has died with the person, you can't revive it. So the same group of people made sure to interview Yemenites who had eaten that in Yemen, and they went through different types of locusts or other kinds of animals, and they checked with them, and then they had a meal where they said these are certified. So now the tradition is not broken, it's documented, so that tradition is kept. And they're doing it, it's not really to discuss people. They just said we should use the Jewish tradition as much as we can. And it's easy to stay within what we know, but let's branch out because we should learn that there's more to it than just what we buy in the supermarket. Now, let's move on. The products, generally, the products that kosher animals make are kosher, and the product that unkosher animals make are not kosher. So, I don't know, lion's milk is not kosher. Pig's milk is not kosher. Cow milk is kosher. Goat milk is kosher.
But the milk that people usually drink that's not kosher is like camel, donkey, and horse.
Thank you. That's what I was wondering because I know nothing about what people drink or don't drink. Camel and donkey is not kosher. And there's one exception to that there's an unkosher animal that produces a food that is kosher. Does somebody know what that is? A little trick question.
Bees.
Yes, bees make honey, and honey is kosher. Well done, Gabby. Well done. Good trivia question. Don't ask me why. I can't explain it to you, but it is kosher. Other foods, so those dairy products, again, sometimes these dairy products are made or cured in a way which includes unkosher substances, and I don't know about that, which is why we have certification, because it's very hard to go into factories and see exactly what they do. So we have places like the OU, the Huff K, the Triangle K, the Star K. There's just so many of them now that have cropped up. Some of them are reliable and some of them less reliable. Some of them rely on leniencies that we don't accept. And if I don't have it in the source sheet, I will add a link to two links on the internet which have a listing of kashrut organizations and agencies that we consider reliable. Water does not need a kashrut certification. Seltzer doesn't need a kashrut certification. But once you start adding other things, that can be a problem because the artificial products could have something that isn't kosher. So what would be another product of food? Is it kosher? Fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables are inherently kosher. The only difference is in grapes and wine. I'm going to put that aside for a moment. But if you had a raw fruit or vegetable, it's always kosher. There's nothing about it. Actually, grapes would also be kosher. It's wine that could be a problem. It's just inherently kosher by definition. There's nothing non-kosher about it. The problem would be when it's cut. Was it cut with a knife, for example, that had an unkosher product, or wasn't cleaned properly, or if it was mixed with other ingredients? So once you start adding other ingredients, that becomes a problem. And you have to know. You have to know what those ingredients were. So far, is this clear, what I've been saying? Okay, great. So fruits and vegetables. And then you have manufactured products. Like grain is inherently kosher because it's grown from the ground. Wheat, oat, barley, all that stuff. But once it gets ground up and processed and could possibly be mixed with some ingredients that are not kosher, that becomes a problem, which is why we need the kashrut organizations, because you don't really know what's in it. Now, it used to be before there were the kashrut organizations, people would more or less look at the ingredients and figure it out. And if it said lard in it or something else, they would say, okay, I don't know if it's kosher or not. But they didn't have many options. And that's why people often, for a while, made their own bread, their own cookies, their own challah, because they didn't have availability of buying something kosher. Any questions till now?
Where
No
does
question.
vegan
Yeah.
certification fit into all of that?
Vegan certification?
Yeah.
In
Like,
other words,
is
what
that
I hear you
recognized at all?
saying, Gabby, why do you need vegan certification? Because if everything is plant-based, is that what you're saying? I just want to make sure you can stay unmuted.
Yeah, like if I buy something at the grocery store, that
That's
like is
certified
certified
vegan.
vegan but not kosher, like how does that fit in?
So let me explain a couple of things that could be problematic about vegan. And one of them is that wine is in its own separate category. Wine is in a category where only Jews are allowed. We're only allowed to use wine or wine products like wine vinegar that were made by a Jew or handled by a Jew or overseen or whatever exactly it is. And that is because wine traditionally was used as a libation for idol worship. And that has remained that we separate wine, which is why you can't just have any wine. It has to be kosher wine. Even though there's nothing as if inherently unkosher in it, they don't put pork juice or whatever that means in it. But because it wasn't made by a Jew, owned by a Jew, I don't know exactly what it is. So wine, as opposed to whiskey just has to be kosher. It doesn't have a special Jewish component to it. For instance, if whiskey is, what do you call it? When you keep it for a few years, what's that called, Martin? In distill it, right? If it's distilled, no. Age it or aging it. If it's aged in a cask that may have had something unkosher, that could be a problem because then the taste of the unkosher could permeate. That's different. Wine inherently must be made by Jews, must be handled by Jews, must be owned. I don't know all of the exact rules, but you can't just buy any wine. Most wines are unkosher. The wine vinegar is similar. So that's one issue that you just don't know if this particular restaurant or food has in it something. I agree that the vast majority is probably kosher, and it's easier to be lenient, especially if somebody's traveling and they don't have a way to get kosher food easily. The easiest way would be really to go to a place like a vegan restaurant that's truly vegan, and just to make sure that it's not, whatever food they're having, let's say, doesn't have wine. And that's one way. Not everybody does that, but I would say there's certainly room for leniency there. The other thing is that the Jewish law regarding eating insects that are not kosher are a big deal, which is why as one gets more right wing, there are more and more vegetables or fruits that people won't eat because maybe there are bugs in them that were not checked or properly taken care of, like soaking it in soap or in vinegar and water or salt. And it can be hard, or do you have to open each of the Brussels sprouts and check that there's no bugs in it, or each of whatever fruit. So some people will only buy specific kinds of broccoli. That's called bodek, much more expensive. Bodek means to check, where they check very, very thoroughly, or check it at home. If it has on it a hechsher, I would say it's good. And if you get hechsher, means the kashrut. Hechsher comes from the word kasher, and that's the rabbinic authorization for it. As long as it has it, certainly good enough for me. And if you have fresh, then I recommend soaking it in a combination of salt and water or vinegar and water, and that actually allows any bugs to rise up. And lettuce has to be well checked because often hidden within the lettuce is insects. So the problem is that many of these restaurants don't have the same stringency, and you wouldn't even know because it gets chopped up. So nobody knows about it. So I would say those are the two main ones. There may be more that I'm not thinking of. But that was a great question, Gabby. That was a really good question, which is why when you live in a place where kosher food is available, you do try to go to vegan restaurants that are that have a hefsher if you can. You know, that again, you live in a place or you're traveling and it's easier to find leniencies for vegan more than any other restaurant. Okay. The next kind of bucket of kosher would be what Grace started talking about, which is mixing meat and milk. And we learned that from, and again, these things are in the source sheet. So at least it gives you something, you know, from the source sheet, it gives you something to start with. There is a biblical prohibition to mix dairy products with, which is milk or anything that comes from milk, like cheeses or butter or cream or anything else that we would consider dairy. That's not the parav. Parav means not dairy and not meat. Just like vegetables and fruit are all parav by definition. Does that make sense to people? Because they're not dairy and they're not meat or chicken. That I just want to make clear. Even fish, by the way, is considered parav, not meat, not dairy.
Isn't
Beef
there a thing where
and
you can't eat fish with meat?
so with meat, yes. So there's a thing that we don't eat fish and meat, and some people don't eat fish with dairy, but I think in the Ashkenazic world, it's very accepted to eat fish with dairy. Yes, we do not mix fish with meat, but I don't actually know what the source is for that. I think it's from Maimonides. I'm not sure. I'd be glad if somebody wants to research that, and then I can add it to my file, unless I wrote it in the file at some point and I forgot. But we do not, as a rule. In fact, we have a separate plate and utensil for fish. You'll see in Orthodox observant households, if there's a fish course, there'll be a different fork and plate, and you then replace it with right. If you had meat for a first course or parav, then, you know, not fish, then you could keep the same fork. Yeah, Shay.
What about chicken and meat?
So let me
Beef.
get to chicken. I'll get to chicken in a moment. So beef, chicken and beef, no problem. Not at all. That's no issue. Beef and dairy. So because beef and dairy or meat and dairy are not allowed to, according to the Torah, which is the most stringent, they are not allowed to be mixed. Therefore, we end up having, for those who are not vegetarian, if you're vegetarian, you could have one set of dishes. But if you eat both genders, as we like to call them, just one way of calling it, meat and dairy. If you eat both, for example, don't have dairy. I never eat dairy, but other people in my home do. So because I have a lactose intolerance. So the only thing I have is milk and coffee, basically, pretty much. Occasionally I can have something like pancakes, or of course I'm gluten-free also, but that has a little bit of milk in it. Doesn't seem to bother me, but most of the time I can't. So for me, theoretically, I could have one set of dishes, but anybody who has both needs to keep a separate set of dishes, a separate set of silverware, a separate set of cooking utensils, a separate set of pots and pans. Again, given how much you use it, you might have more meat, in which case you would have more of those. And when you entertain, it might be easier to entertain with meat meals. So you might have a nicer set or a bigger set, but some people have a bigger dairy set because that's what they love. So they have to be separate because we must separate them. Ta'am, which means taste, is not allowed to be infused from one to the other. The same way I said non-kosher food, the taste, not only can you not eat non-kosher food, you also can't eat things that have taste infused from non-kosher food. If somebody cooked in it would be a non-kosher pot, you cooked, treif, meaning non-kosher. Treif is the word that's generally used for non-kosher. If you had treif hot dogs cooked in a pot, we assume that the heat allowed the taste of the hot dogs to be infused into the walls of the pot. And then when you cook something else in that pot, that taste would, again, because of the heat, the molecules get, excited, and then the taste can get infused. And we all know that. We all know that there are certain tastes that you taste it even in the next food. Does that make sense to people? There's a reason that we separate meat and milk. Now, it's true, theoretically, if you wash a pot really well, then most of the taste goes away. But unless it's been a while since you've used that pot, some of the taste is kind of hidden in the walls. All right. And therefore, you have to have separate ones. Now, my family, we also have a large selection of pareve, meaning not meat, not dairy. So who could tell me why that would be useful?
Let's say you're making a dish that's parve and you originally make it when you're eating dairy. That way, like if you have leftovers, you could eat it in the future in like a meat meal.
Perfect, exactly. You make pasta or rice or quinoa or vegetable, with souffle, but not something with dairy on it, or with whatever it is. If you make it pareve and you keep the utensils pareve, then you could eat it on meat dishes, you could eat it on dairy dishes. But again, you'd have to, scoop it out with a pareve utensil and heat it up that way. You could heat it up in pareve and then scoop it out. And most salads, unless there's cheese in it or, some meat in it, let's say, are inherently pareve as a rule. Again, unless you add it from the meat or the dairy. So your salad bowls are often pareve, but then some people who put cheese in their salads, which I can't eat, so I don't have that, then those salad bowls should be considered dairy. So that's where it comes from, this whole thing about having two sets of dishes. I don't have pareve utensils and plates. That felt like overkill for me, but I have a lot of pots and frying pans that are. Not everybody does that. Some people just say either it's meat or it's dairy. I don't want to deal with pareve. Some people are like, pareve. Wow, that's awesome. I never thought of having pareve pots. That's terrific. So, it
Rabbi,
can
can you go over that one more time? I'm
Which
sorry. The pareve part. Like,
well, why don't you tell me, Toya, what do you know that pareve means?
okay, so from my understanding, it's not meat, not dairy.
Right. As a
Okay.
matter of fact, in Hebrew, the word for pareve is stami or stam, which means just nothing, because it's not one gender or the other. It's nothing, but you could use it. Now, again, I said with fish, we don't usually do it with meat, but putting that aside, most vegetable side dishes, potatoes, all that stuff, they're inherently pareve. So which part do you want me to go over, Latoya? And I'm happy to go over it. I just want to see where you got stuck.
I think I got stuck with the example that Gabby just gave about pasta and you can reheat, or I don't.
Okay, so
I was lost.
pasta is inherently pareve. Do you agree with, does that make sense to you?
Yes, that does.
So let's say you have a pareve pot and a pareve serving spoon, and you cook the pasta in a pareve pot. One day you could use it in a meat dish and add a meat sauce. And another day you could heat it up with cheese in a dairy pot, because it inherently comes as being neither dairy or meat. Same thing with rice, same thing with quinoa, same thing with any of the grains, farro, there are a lot of them. Does that make sense, Latoya?
Yes.
Are you
Yes.
sure? I feel like there's still some hesitancy.
There is. Okay, so once you add cheese or whatever, like any kind of dairy, it's no longer pareve.
Of course, 100%. In
Okay.
fact, let's assume you had a pareve pot and this bowl, let's say, is a dairy bowl. It isn't, but let's say it was. And
Yes.
let's say this was a meat one, which it isn't, but it could be, right? So let's say in this was a dairy one. Let's say I put pasta and I put a little bit of cheese and I ate it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day I took some of the pasta, which is still in a pareve container. I put it into here, poured a little meat sauce on it. I can't put it back in the pareve pot
Oh,
because I
okay.
already made it meat. I'm just talking about when you
Oh,
cook the pasta. Let's say you cook a whole bag, you have leftover, you put it into a pareve container in the refrigerator. And then
yes.
one day you could take from the pareve container and add meat sauce or whatever. And one day you could put macaroni and cheese, not in the pareve container. You have to use dairy for this and meat for that.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, but you're starting from a place of pareve. So again, some people like to do that. Some people don't. The problem is if you take a dairy pot, even if there's no dairy in it right now, and you cook pasta in it, you can't use that pasta with meat sauce, because we assume that a teeny bit of the dairy taste that was hidden in the walls of the dairy pot got infused into the pasta. Does that make sense to people? I need some thumbs up or something to make sure. Latoya, I want to make sure you understood. Thank you, Gabby.
Yes.
Latoya,
Yes.
does that make sense? Okay. So sometimes it happens, people make a mistake. That's often a question I get. Oh, my son took the and pasta and added this, and I don't know what to do. So there's nuance. There's sometimes you have to dump the food. Sometimes the pot is okay. The food, it depends. But if you're planning, if you knew you made it in a dairy pot, so like it could happen that you made it 3 days ago and you forgot and you added meat sauce. And because you forgot, we say, okay, you didn't, ruin anything. It's okay. But you can't do it intentionally. If you do it intentionally, you have to throw the food away. And the reason we do that is to create safeguards so that we separate meat and milk. Everybody with me until here? Okay. If not, I'm assuming you'll say something. So let's go that way. The next thing is chicken. Chicken is in a very unusual category. What happened was, according to the Torah, chicken is like fish. It's pareve. All fowl, all birds, meaning chicken, turkey, quail. I don't know what else. I'm not that knowledgeable. What? Duck, duck.
There you go.
Duck, peacock. I hate duck, by the way, so I never eat duck, but that's okay. I don't happen to like it. What did you say? You can unmute, guys. You can unmute. It's okay.
Goose.
Goose, right? Goose. I happen to love goose liver. Love, 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 love goose liver. So here's the thing. From the Torah, it's not considered meat, but here was the problem. Even though it's not considered beef and meat, according to the Torah, the same places that slaughter the meat, slaughter chicken. And you still have to kosher it in the same way, meaning you have to do the salting and all that. And either people were getting confused or they were afraid that people would get confused. And they said, okay, this is too confusing for people. They were worried that if you could have chicken, people often, we all know that even if you're not observant about, even if you're not observant, people lump chicken together. Are you having turkey patties or having beef patties? If you're saying you're having meat patties, people might say, wait, is that turkey or chicken or beef? What is it? But you wouldn't say, oh, does that mean you're having salmon patties? Nobody would ever say that. It's clear that if you're having a meat patty, it might be chicken or turkey, but it's not going to be salmon, right? Fish is in its own category. So they said, in order to make sure that we never get to a place biblically where we have beef with dairy, because people got confused, we're just going to throw chicken and turkey into the same category as beef. But the difference is that it's rabbinically prohibited and not biblically prohibited, which we've discussed a few times. Biblical is the most stringent, the most important, the one we keep first. Then if you go up or down a level, I guess you could do it this way, then rabbinic. So rabbis sometimes added a prohibition in order never to get to a biblical prohibition or for any other reason. Like, for example, we've spoken about rabbinic holidays. Hanukkah was added by rabbis because it didn't happen when the Bible was finished. But so they added a mitzvah, a holiday called Hanukkah. But in this case, the reason they added the chickens because they didn't want people to ever get to a place where beef would be eaten with dairy. Does that make sense to people? That's why chicken is kind of, most people, I never knew this growing up. Actually, at some point somebody told me that. I never knew that chicken wasn't biblical. I had no clue because, people put them together. You go to the supermarket, or wherever, kosher, there's beef, chicken, turkey, they're all together in ground meat, but the fish is all separate. You don't necessarily separate chicken. I mean, a little bit it's separated. But anyway, whether one likes it or not, or thinks that's silly or not, it doesn't really matter because we keep rabbinic laws as much as we keep biblical. It's just that the level of what we consider holiness or stringency is different. Like if somebody had to, for some strange reason, have either beef or chicken with milk or with dairy for some odd reason, or together with some food that had some dairy in it, we would choose to have the chicken with it rather than the beef if both were options, because we're circumventing a rabbinic law and not a biblical law. And that's important to know. By the way, Biblical law is called midoraita. It's an Aramaic word, or midoraisa, same word. And rabbinic law is called midorabanan, which is, or derabanan, which you hear the word rabbi in there. Rabbanan is, you can hear rabbi. Okay, was that clear? I just want to make sure each piece is clear. You can always ask me more questions. Latoya, question.
Yes. Well, I just wanted to clarify. So chicken and beef are treated the same when it comes to the dairy option.
Everything.
Okay.
Everything. When it comes to
Everything. Okay.
everything. You eat on meat dishes, you cook it in meat. But everything, it's treated the same. Everything.
Thank you.
It's like the rabbis took it from the parav bucket and moved it into the meat bucket. So we do not differentiate, but it is important for you to know. If somebody said, oh, well, that's just rabbinic. I just want you to understand that's true. It is rabbinic, but we keep rabbinic law just like we keep biblical law. But there is a difference in the stringencies for rabbinic law and biblical law. The level of authority is a little bit different. Okay. So we've already spoken. Today, we're just going to talk about the components of kosher. And then the next time, which if you read, I'm going to Israel, so it'll be after Thanksgiving. The next time we might do a quick recap, but then we'll talk about how you run a kosher home. What do you do when you travel? You know, things like that. It's just a lot of information to take at once. By the way, when I said about parav, even people, not everybody, but most people, even those who don't have parav, very often their best knives that are used for cutting vegetables are parav, so that they can cut the vegetables for either dairy or meat. You don't necessarily have a whole set of sharp, expensive knives for dairy and just for cutting vegetables, and another one. Obviously, you have separate knives for meat. I get that. You're going to have for cutting the chicken or the beef. But for cutting vegetables, people often have cutting boards that are either a different color or just look different. And they have sharp knives that are, that are parav. I have mostly my best knives are parav because that's what I cut more than anything else is vegetables. And we'll talk about that next time, how we run, how we have a kitchen and how we do that. And we'll talk about that more. And what do we do when we eat out and with. Now, let's see, we've spoken about what food inherently, seafood is not kosher. What's called seafood. It just doesn't fall into any of the kosher baskets. It's not, it doesn't have fins and scales, right? It doesn't follow anything. So that would be things like clams and lobster and shrimp. Somebody who didn't used to keep kosher became Orthodox and went to rabbinical school and said he misses shrimp every day. Every day. That's what he told me. He said, I miss shrimp every day. I thought, wow, he really had to give something up. That's a big deal. I never had to give up shrimp, luckily. So I had no issue there. Never tasted it and probably never will taste it. Possible, but I don't think so. Not planning on it. So I give a lot of, I just want to put it out there that people who are coming from a world where they eat certain foods and they have to give them up, or they decide to give them up by becoming observant, that can be hard. Somebody loves a cheeseburger, and that is like literally something that's their favorite thing. That can be a hard thing to give up, and I want to acknowledge it. Or if they're used to having seafood that they love. And there was a woman from the Far East who said, it's a big deal in their families to have these dumplings, the dim sum, and then none of that is kosher because it's made with pork or it's made with something else. And I got that. A big part of their rituals and their getting together had to do with, certain foods. And that was a big deal. So that was one of her biggest challenges. Somebody else, it might be Shabbat, that's their biggest challenge. But I can imagine that food can be, and yes, there is fake meat, which I don't happen to like very much. I've tried a few of them and I just don't like them. But maybe there'll be ones that come out that taste better. And there's fake cheese, which I happen to use because I'm lactose intolerant. So I never have a cheeseburger anyway. But I can imagine somebody who loves it. The melted cheese, I see from advertisements, people pour the Philly steak and all those things. It looks yummy. And I can imagine that that's hard to give up. And I want to acknowledge that it is not an easy thing to give up. And Just want to name it. I have a lot of respect for somebody who decides to, decides to embrace an observant lifestyle when that's hard for them. Somebody else might say, look, I like it, but I don't care. It's not going to change my life. I never ate seafood or it wasn't a big deal for me, and that's fine too. And that doesn't mean I have less respect for them. I don't mean it that way. I just want to acknowledge that it can be difficult. Somebody who's vegan or even vegetarian might have an easier time switching to kosher. Just naming that, that's all. And also very often, because you need so much more care with kosher products, it's often more expensive and not available everywhere. So it's a big deal in lifestyle. But there's also yummy, delicious food that you can have that's kosher. My husband and I make terrific, delicious food. As do many other people. And also, I guess the palate, right? If people grew up with a certain palate, that what they're used to, and Jewish dishes just seem really odd to them and don't really speak to them, I want to acknowledge that can be difficult. So that's it. I just wanted to mention it. Okay. Now, we spoke a little bit about transferring taste. So in addition to not being allowed to eat food that's non-kosher, you also cannot have food where taste was infused or transferred. So that becomes complicated when you eat somewhere where they cook even pasta. If it's cooked in a non-kosher pot, it is not ideal because we're assuming that non-kosher food infused the walls of that pot. And heat is what allows the food, otherwise it's not a pot, it's just a bowl and it's cold, then the taste's not going to be transferred, it doesn't stick. But if you have heat, that allows the taste to be infused into the pot. And by the way, pots can be koshered. They can be made kosher. Don't worry. Most things can be made kosher. Not food, I'm saying. I mean, pots, utensils, most of them can be made kosher in one way or another. And I would work with each and every one of you on doing that. So that should not stress you, hopefully. But here's another way that taste can be transferred. When you have sharp items, what do I mean by sharp? Onion, leeks, garlic, radishes, kohlrabi, anything that has a sharpness to it. We know that if you don't clean something that you cut or that had onions, fresh onions I'm talking about, that taste can stay for a while. It just does, because it's hard to get rid of it because it permeates. So those are two ways that taste can be transferred, which is why when we go out to a salad bar, we might have all the vegetables except for the sharp ones, unless we know that restaurant has special knives or very clean knives, like they have a station for vegetables where they use specific knives that are cold and clean, well cleaned, which I assume most people do, especially today because they're vegetarians and vegans, and they would care very deeply that but if if you buy carrots that are sliced in the store, those are clean knives that cut them. They're not going to cut an onion and not wash it and then cut a carrot, because nobody would buy the carrots afterwards because they would taste the onion. So, that's part of living kosher and eating kosher. I don't want to go into all of that yet. I just want to explain to you the building blocks of keeping kosher. So you always have to worry when the heat or something sharp could infuse or transfuse. I would just want to transfuse. That's not a word. That's a word, but I don't think it's connected to this. Just want to check in my file to make sure that I didn't miss something about these, as I call building blocks. And I would love for people to, unmute and tell me if you have any questions until now, please.
Which one? How does
You
it go?
mentioned having just the K on the one of the questions. Were you talking about just the K or like the
No,
OK?
100% not. As a matter of fact, K is not copyrighted, meaning you could put K on pork and nobody would be able to sue you for that, because K doesn't mean kosher. It just means you put a K, like a Q or like a T or an S. It's not copyrighted. But there's OK, there's triangle K and triangle K. Is that the one, Martin? That we ever put? Yeah. Triangle K, unfortunately, is not what we consider such a reliable supervision, depending on what. Like if it's meat, it's not reliable. If there are lighter things that don't have as many laws attached to it, it could be okay. For example, I just want to give you that example because I'm trying to remember which one it was. Give me a moment. There was some food that somebody asked me, like bagels might be okay with triangle K, for example, because nothing inherently unkosher goes into it. So there's juice. So juice is cranberry juice can be a problem because it might have grape juice in it. Grape. Is somebody speaking? Where am I hearing that? Oh, Grace.
Oh,
maybe
I'm
I heard
sorry.
Shay. No, it's okay, Shay. I just didn't know if somebody was talking and wanted to say something. I'm sorry, Martin. What'd you say? Oh, like triangle K might be okay for fruit juices as long as there's no grape juice in it. If it's 100% cranberry juice, that could be okay. All right. Let me just check because just a minute. What was it that somebody asked me? Oh, I know what it was. Somebody was buying seltzer. So remember we said that seltzer, which is bubbly water, it doesn't need a hashgacha, a hechsher, doesn't need a supervision. But what if it has juices in it? What if it has flavors? I'm sorry. So she wanted to know because it was on sale if triangle K was okay for that, and that was okay. So it depends on what we're talking about. Something like chicken or beef or even other things that have all sorts of ingredients that we're not sure. They use leniencies that not all of us rely on. So it's more of a problem. So that would be your answer, Shay. Do not just buy something with a K unless you know it's kosher.
Right. I just wanted to know what you were meaning by that question.
100%, and I appreciate that. Oh, here's another one. Okay. Yeah, go on. Yeah. Another
Anybody?
question? Anybody question? One of the last things is that we tovel. Tovel means to immerse. And it's a bit of a leftover from other times when I think dishes were used for maybe for idol worship or something like that. But in any case, when we buy anything made of glass or metal used with food that was bought from somebody who is not Jewish, it has to be immersed in a special mikvah, which is a ritual. Well, there's the immersion of the whole body in a mikvah. That's for women who had ritual impurity after menstruating, or for a convert. A convert has to go. Conversion is with immersion, and you kind of are born again. But there's also what's called the kalim mikvah. Kalim are vessels. It's smaller. It usually has a basket, so you don't lose the dish or the pot that you're totally. In fact, I just ordered new frying pans because my frying pan, the Teflon cover wasn't working so well. It was like done and everything was sticking to it. So I have to go and immerse them in the kalim mikvah, in the vessel mikvah. So that would be another step for everybody who's converting. Until you convert, it belongs to a non-Jewish person, which is you. So soon after converting, you have the opportunity to immerse those vessels that belonged to you before and make them viable for eating from. That's also in your file. Just checking everything in the file. Animals, birds, fish, creatures, blood, fruits, grains, wine. Yeah, well, let's finish with this right now, and then we'll continue next time. Not only do we not mix meat and milk together or meat and dairy together, we also wait in between meals because I think it's something, just 1 second. I think it's something about the food mixing in our stomachs, something about that. We want to make a separation. So there are different customs. The Dutch wait 1 hour after a meat meal. Germans, Yekim, wait 3 hours. Other people wait 6 hours or 5 hours, meaning 5 hours and 1 minute, meaning into the 6th hour, or 5 hours and 31 minutes, which means most of the 6th hour. But there are a lot of people who, after a meat meal, will wait 6 hours to have, let's say, a cup of coffee with milk. And that can be frustrating for people. So 3 hours is somewhat prevalent, actually. And other people have taken it on because, like, it's good enough for the Germans, good enough for them, German folks. But the most prevalent is 5.5 or 6. But there are people. I mean, my friends were visiting the chief rabbi of Amsterdam, And they were having a Shabbat meal and eating, they were sitting and talking, and an hour had passed from the main course, and the rabbi and his wife spread a tablecloth on half the table, had ice cream for dessert, which feels very, dairy ice cream, which feels very odd to people who wait 3 or 6 hours, but that's their customs as long as an hour has passed, 60 minutes from when they had meat or chicken. But most people wait either 3 hours or 5, 5.5, or 6. And just wanted you to know about that. And I think that's enough for tonight. A lot of information. Any questions before we leave?
I do have one.
There's
Why
generally
is
the
Yeah.
idea.
Wait 1 second, Shay. We'll start with Gabby and then Shay. Go, Gabby.
Why is it that it's like dairy to meat is okay, but not meat to dairy? Like for the
I think
time.
that's, so there's 2 parts. I can answer that. First of all, meat takes a lot longer to digest. And that's why there are specific cheeses, which there are very few of them that are kosher, that are aged or something. And those you also have to wait 1 hour or 3 hours or 6 hours. But I'm not familiar with which ones they are. Like American cheese doesn't have that. The white cheeses don't have that. It's very specific yellow aged cheeses. I don't know enough about it, but that's the reason, because it takes longer to digest. So generally we say either wait a half hour, or for some reason you're eating it, wash your mouth out really well so it doesn't mix in your mouth. Did I answer both? Yeah. Did I answer both of your, did I answer that question? Yeah, I did. I said that meat takes longer and there are some cheeses. Yes, Shay.
No, you got everything.
Oh, okay. All
I
right,
do
my
have a
friends.
question, one quick question about the
Yeah.
grape juice.
The grape juice. So because we said that wine or wine products were used as libation for idol worship, there is a very strict adherence to only Jews making the wine or overseeing it or whatever it is. Serving it, yeah. Also serving it unless it's boiled. And that's true for people who we don't, unless the wine is what's called boiled, which is, I'm not a wine lover, so they say that it doesn't taste as good. I can't tell you that it makes a big difference because I'm not a, it just doesn't make such a difference. I don't do well with alcohol as it is. So I have no need to drink wine or a lot of wine. So it doesn't make such a difference to me, but we don't have non-Jewish people serve it unless it's boiled wine. We don't mix the non-Jewish and Jewish, and that had to do with idol worship. And I think that was a way of separating Jewish people and not hanging out with people who are using wine as libation for idol worship, which we don't generally think about nowadays. But some people, I guess, still do it. Buddhism maybe, and maybe some Christianity or Catholicism, I'm not sure, that also holds that it's idol worship. But that's where it comes from, and therefore also grape products are a problem. Grape jelly can be a problem, believe it or not.
Oh,
So you
okay.
are right. It has to do, not grapes, not raw, fresh grapes. That's fine. That's like any other fruit.
Okay, that's clear. Thank
I
you.
think, but it has a
Mhm.
special, okay, when we get to the blessings, we don't talk about that now.
Okay.
All right. Great. You have the file. I encourage you to look at it. I really encourage you to come with questions next time. And next time we will talk about how you set up a kitchen to be kosher, which we touched on a little bit. What do you do when you're traveling? What do you do when you go to a supermarket? Where are there leniencies? Where are there not? And anything else having to do with keeping kosher. All right. Take good care, everybody. Be well. Hope to see you again in 3 weeks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Have a good
you.
trip.
Pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.